if you go remote, like, I don't know if you're even working. I can't see you working. I can't, like, I don't know if you're going and taking the dog for a walk and spending an hour watching Netflix in the middle of the day or whatever.
Welcome to the Big Brand Theory Podcast by Blackwood Creative.
All right, Joe, we are in the office right now. It's currently, we're recording, it's early December 2021. We've officially hit over a year and a half of dealing with COVID stuff. Aside from COVID itself, it's brought about this idea of working remote. I want to be able to work whenever I want, wherever I want, get the job done. There's a lot of companies that are like, great, as long as you're doing your work, I don't really care where you're at. But there are some companies, and obviously there's different companies that are out there that you just can't work remote. Like, you got to be in person. Our print shop, there's not really.
No, you can't pick up the garbage remotely.
Yeah, there's just things that you just got to do in person. But I think what it's also done is, with like a lot of things, it's not, I don't think it's too bad, but there's a little bit of like a this side, that side mentality with, is remote work okay? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Some people are like, I don't really care. Others are like, it's the only way to do it. And others are like, it's the worst. So I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit about remote work, the good, the bad, and then, but specifically to dive into a question that we both saw on LinkedIn was about, is firing over Zoom or virtually okay? And my answer to that was, it has to be, right? Like, if we're going all in on allowing people to work remote whenever, wherever they want, then we got to be okay with having the hard conversations like firing or reprimanding or corrections and all that kind of stuff. We got to be able to do it virtually, or remote just doesn't work by default. So what are your thoughts on that piece of it, hiring, firing, hard conversations, doing it virtually?
I think that a lot of companies pivoted really well into remote work, and then people fell in love with it. Like, I get to be at home, rocking sweatpants. Not everybody did, but like, just in general, like, you get to have a little bit more of like your own space. You still do meetings. You do all the things that are with remote work. But I feel like the question that people aren't really asking is, are all of your employees able to work remotely? Mm-hmm. Like, not everybody is built that way, that they can be self-sufficient, run by tasks, and go through that. Sometimes people need the accountability factor of being in the office surrounded by people to do their work. Like, that's legitimate. I have ADHD. Like, I can focus in on certain things, and then I can focus on nothing. So, like, that's just the reality of it. Like, I will come into an office, and I see a task list, and I can go through that, work through it. I'm surrounded by you if I have questions and all that, and that picks up the secondary part of it. Communication through an email or a text message is 10% of communication. Right. 90% of communication is body language.
Right.
Like, and tone and all that. Like, literally listening to this right now, you can tell that there's more passion about what we're talking about than just talking about remote work. Not, like, you know, death by PowerPoint. But no, that's the part that they don't address either, is like, you lose so much when you go remote. You gain a lot too. You gain that freedom as an employee, but as an employer or a business owner, you lose the ability to have your team collaborate in such ways that are meaningful, that are in person. Like today, we just sporadically went outside and shot fun stories for Christmas photos in person, and like, that idea wasn't on the calendar, that idea wasn't, you know, whatever. We were just sitting here and we're like, oh, look, it's snowing. Let's go outside and take that. Mm-hmm. You lose that factor. You do not have that when you work remote.
Right.
You don't have that ability to communicate freely and openly. You have the restriction of an email or a Slack message or whichever, and you lose that ability to give tone and body language and like happiness and all that to your message. So like when it comes to the hard details, like reviews or terminations or anything like that, if you're all for remote work and all the things that it implies, you also have to accept that those things are part of it too.
Yeah.
Like you just, it is. Like you can't be like, it's safe for us to work from remote, you know, at our own convenience and these hours and as long as my work's done. And then it's like, but in order to get fired, I gotta be in front of somebody. It's like, is it safe or is it not safe? Like there's two things there. I guess you could swing it where like, especially with the video that we're talking about, where you could individualize things. But the reality is that corporations have been doing that continually. That's how layoffs work. If you walk into a factory floor and they're about to do a layoff, they're not going to go to John down in, you know, shingling that's going to be like, hey, John, just like everybody else, we're going to have to lay off today, kind of thing. They're not going to do that. They're going to literally get everybody together, make a group announcement that, hey, this is what's going on, this is what we have to do. And, you know, if it's termination or layoff and like it's like a 30-day or 60-day kind of thing and then coming back, whatever. But like, this is not new. The fact that it was done remotely and with other implications previous to that, that's why it kind of is making the news and the headlines, and I understand that. But you have to accept that if you want to work remote, if you want to have the easiness, you have to accept the hard.
Right. So let's hit on that. Let's just go right now and talk about what are the pros and cons of remote work. Right. So let's start with the cons. Like, what are some of the things that we see? I think we already talked about missing body language. I think that's a huge piece of it. The what do you call like water cooler talk? While some people are like, great, cut that out so I can be more efficient. At the same time, if we're looking at trying to build a team and a great like cohesive community within our organization, we kind of need that. Like, I'm okay with a little inefficiency if we chat for 5 minutes here and there, but that's important to build that community. So I think you're missing that when you're going virtual. The other thing I think is a negative is that, like you mentioned, not everybody can stay on task when they're just at home. And I think that from from an employer's level, looking down on the employees, that they're seeing like, well, if you go remote, like, I don't know if you're even working. I can't see you working. I don't know if you're going and taking the dog for a walk and spending an hour watching Netflix in the middle of the day or whatever. All that stuff is just unknown. Again, some of that is just you got to trust people to do the right thing and know that some won't, and eventually you'll figure it out and you'll let them go, get them off your team, and you'll hire somebody that can do the right thing working from home. But I'm just seeing a lot of things like that. Working remote can be a problem, and having hard conversations is even more cold when it's just virtual. And I've had to fire somebody virtually. Firing people is never fun, no matter what. Right. But doing it virtually is even worse because there is no way to, like, you know, with your body language and even like your tone and stuff like that, it's just not great. So
I think about it in the terms of firing and everything is like people look at that as like it's just super cold, like, and I'm like, you're right, it is cold because you lack that communication. The other part is that, and I'm sure that I'm 100% sure that I can find studies on it for sure that will say that increasing remote work will find you the right people to be efficient with tasks and all that. But I'm willing to bet if you do a full vet of all your staff that are super efficient at remote work and everything, if you bring them together at a Christmas party at the end of the year when everything's safe, they're not gonna know what to do. They haven't talked to people for months, and like all they've talked about is work through email. I actually just posted about this today on LinkedIn. It's like you have to have, like you said, the water cooler talk, right?
Yeah.
So you need to have that collaboration of your team, not just about work, but about other things. Like, I don't know, I'm a super nerd. I talk about D&D stuff all the time, like, whatever. But, like, that is the part that I think people miss out on, is that humans are not robots.
Yeah.
And they are not built to be 100% efficient. They're not. Like, your mind will wander. You will get to a point where, oh, wow, I just spent 15 minutes down a rabbit hole on YouTube looking up whatever for Christmas shopping in Baltimore or something. I don't know. But it's those things that you look at, and yes, they're inefficient. But they're what make your employee. And you have to, like, we talked about this before, like, you have to understand your employee and their communication style and all that. When you get into remote work, how are you supposed to figure out their communication style when it's all done through email?
Yeah, it's much harder. What about the pros? What are good things for working remote?
If you can be efficient and stay on task and everything, realistically, if you're on a performance versus time, then the people that are high performers, they only have to work 4 hours a day instead of 8 hours. Mm-hmm. And some people might look at that like, well, that's not fair. And I'm like, well, if you are a high performer, you could also work 4 hours. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's the part that people don't really think of. They just think of everything based in time. And like, if a task is done and you have 10 tasks for the day and you get all 10 tasks by 11:59, if I was the employer, I would be like, dude, great job. Yeah. Like, go get Starbucks and like, what, pop on Netflix, dude, you killed it. Like, that is what I think is a conversation that more people should have. Is like, if you get the stuff done that you needed to, maybe even more, like working ahead. Like, we don't work in the day of, we work weeks, months and ahead. And that's the part too, is like, if you work ahead and you do a good job, you should be rewarded for it. Mm-hmm. So like, this whole idea of, I've worked ahead 3 months and I've done all the right things and now I'm going to keep handing you the same stuff and keep handing you more and more, versus, you know, if you have Sally that's doing that and then you have John that's doing just his day-to-day stuff being remote, and he's not working nearly as efficient and he's still filling out that 8 hours, how are you going to be able to tell the two? Like you said, like, how are you going to tell if this person's doing Netflix or going to the gym or walking their dog? And I'm like, that's the part for me personally that I'm sitting there and I'm like, if their work is done and they go through that process of, you know, doing everything right, or not necessarily everything right, but doing all their tasks and everything appropriately and efficiently, the time doesn't matter. If they can do all that and they turn out good quality work too, that's the thing. I don't want you to run through it and like, give me crap. Mm-hmm. But if you run through it and you do 4 hours worth of work or 8 hours worth of work in 4 hours, that's killer. But it also comes down to the employee and being part of the workforce, that you sit there and you're like, okay, I've done this and I'm really good at it and I'm continually doing this, but I'm only working 4 hours a day. Now I get to do other things. And that's where you can come to your employer and be like, I'm really killing it at this. Where can I like do additional things for you? And that's where you might get a raise. That's where you might
100%.
Step into another role and like a management role and all that. Like, that's the part that I think is left out of that conversation too. Like, oh, I did it really good, so now I only work half a day. And I'm like, you should have the drive to do more and then get to that next, you know, that next level, that next, I don't really like hierarchy because I was in the military. I don't like that. But like, you get to that next position, right? That's how you do that. You work hard and you accept more responsibilities and you prove that you're worthy of that. That's the part of the conversation that gets missed in remote work too, is that if you just see tasks being done and they're like, well, I'm here every day and I do my tasks. I'm like, yes, you are doing your job. The position that above you does more than your job, so you have to work hard, do additional things to get to that position. Mm-hmm. That's how it is across the board. You don't get a promotion based on doing the bare minimum.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so I think like anything else, right, remote work has its pros and cons. Obviously, it feels like to me, when you look at remote work and you look at the whole organization, right, the entire company, remote work seems more negative than positive for an entire organization. When you boil it down, though, it's probably more positive for the individual who wants to work remote because they have more flexibility. They don't have a commute now. They can eat from home, so they're saving money on lunch. Like there's several benefits for working remote. There's several negatives for the employer when they're saying, okay, now I got to send home equipment. Oh, your internet isn't very good. So now every time we're on a Zoom call, it's a little choppy. So
Right.
do I need to pay you more so you can upgrade your internet? And like, but I'm also paying for internet at our office building that you're not using. So I think there's just a lot of things that need to be figured out as we've kind of been forced into a virtual environment. Now we're back to like, you get to pick. Because generally everybody's fine at this point, but now it's like, what's best? And at the end of the day, each individual team member or employee they need to figure out what's best for them, but they also need to be conscious of what's best for the organization.
100%.
And I personally think, which is why all of my companies work in person, I think virtual is less effective of a work environment than in person. So that's why I want my team here. I want to see them every day. I want to be able to look across and say, it doesn't look like they're having a good time, or it looks like something's off. I can't do that if I'm not on a Zoom call. I don't see them. All that kind of stuff is just gone. And we've taken out the heart of the organization and just said, this is the employer, here's the workers, they work wherever they work. They get their tasks done, and we're on our way. And while some people want that, work is just work, I want to just be done with it, a lot of people want that community. They want to make friends at work. They want to build a team and all that kind of stuff. So
I would actually go into say one more pro that we could say would be for the employer side that you brought up is like, especially at corporation level, if you have 20 buildings that you pay millions of dollars for, right? And you pay for all the utilities, you pay for snacks, you pay sometimes for lunch on Fridays or whatever it is. All of that money that you no longer have to do, granted, that doesn't mean that they sold the buildings or anything like that, but I'm just saying, if all of your workforce is now remote and you no longer are spending millions of dollars for an actual piece of property or the upkeep of those properties, that kind of lends the hand to, okay, well, you have that to reinvest into the company and your team, and that's the part that...
But do you? Well, that's a valid point. The question, and this is going to sneak into my commercial real estate love over here, is that I think that with virtual work, large corporations with buildings that fit, 5,000 people in it or something like that, like those buildings are going to devalue because they're no longer needed. So large corporations that own it are going to say, well, I would love to just sell this and invest more into my team. Nobody's here buying it. And if I still need an office of some sort, the smaller spaces are becoming more needed. It hasn't exactly happened yet. I'm not a realtor, so I don't really know. But watching our own marketplace, that hasn't happened yet. But I think it's going to take a year or 2 years of these corporations sitting on buildings that are 20% occupied saying, like, we need to do something about this. This is just draining cash. And so the question is, can they sell it? And if they can, do they turn and invest that into whatever that would be for the virtual employees? Or do they just say, great, more bottom line for me?
Right. That's the part, is like, does it contribute to the company, or does it contribute to maybe staff wages increase? Does it mean that now instead of, just standard 401k, maybe you do like a match or whatever it is, any of those things? But that's the part that I think people need to kind of address with their employer at a certain point, is like, if they sold their building, they no longer, like, if they don't do Christmas parties, they don't do bonuses, they don't do any of this, it's like at a certain point, you're going to hit that where you're like, okay, they are like they cut out like 20-30% of their, their costs this year. And we're still doing the same work and we're still doing the same pay. That just means that 30% essentially went to the employer and nothing changed. But did it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's way too much going on.
There's way too much in the background that people think that. They're like, oh, this is money in their pocket. And you're like, how about changing over for remote work and putting things in place for that?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe buying
Expensive,
everybody MacBooks.
all new laptops and all new phones and all this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the part that people don't ever think about. They're like, my stuff. So it's a good conversation to have, and I think more people need to have it, especially with remote work. But yeah, pros and cons all day.
It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out over the next couple of years. So.